All right. Hello, BookTube. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope the world isn't too much of a dumpster fire wherever this finds you. People often say, oh, you should add like and subscribe buttons. I should do that. I need to get better at doing that with my pieces, and I will. But thank you to anyone who has been listening along as I've been talking about Children of Doro and its source material in a sort of preemption of its publication on May 4 because it is not a normal text. It is science fiction based on the Brothers Karamazov. It is Dostoevskian through and through. What does that mean? Well, I've talked about that in other episodes. One component, though, that we'll talk about today relates to world building, which is so important for writers in any context, really. But especially, I think, in science fiction and fantasy as well, because you do have to often create something new. You don't want to lean too much on what already exists. And the Brothers Karamazov is absolutely based on Christianity, which means that it's based in part on a culture informed by the Bible. But that part is really important. Culture informed by the Bible. Whenever we think that we are informed by a given text, we're really informed by the conversations that have been had around that text. And that can be a little bit difficult for folks to hold on to, because they think, truly, no, I'm just taking it from this book. Well, everything we take from a given text is mediated by its context. So different church communities, for instance, will highlight different passages, and different selections for sermons are going to lead to different conversations. So everything is much more fluid. And I wanted to capture that in my piece by having a core canon for my civilization. The partnership is a compact. It's not the only compact. There are others in this world of mine. The partnership and the alliance of friendship are two major competing civilizations. And the funny thing is, they have slightly different versions of the same core text. So you have the Sunmaster's journey for partnership, and then you have the Starchild's Voyage for alliance of friendship. And you think, well, those sound fairly similar, but they're quite different in terms of implication. Maybe you can tell just from the names. The Sunmaster versus the Starchild. One of them takes on a very different, more subordinate role and sees the individual moving through their journey in the cosmos as towards something greater, and the other one is towards an understanding of one's smallness. So, slight difference. Sunmaster and Starchild, huge difference in ideology and theology, and in kind of a theology, not really with necessarily a God at the center. There is religion in my world as well, with one species in particular, the retets. The retets have an orthodox order as well as cultural filtration, so that you have some populations that hold to looser ideas of the divine tunnel. They're my naked mole rat species. They are species that traditionally lives in burrows, and definitely has a vocabulary that's based around tunnels, and also a spirituality that's based on the kinds of sonics that one would get in tunnels. So their notions of the divine and how one connects with the divine are different because of their species. But you also have Orthodox members who are extreme in their beliefs, as well as folks who are more culturally part of that framework, or maybe leaning a little bit more to secularism. Really important when it comes to describing their mating practices, because there are elements of that part of a retet's life that change depending on whether one is spiritual or not. So, hugely important. Not going to get too much into that. The main canonical texts of these civilizations are not involving a god form, but they are involving the idea of aspiring to a much higher self, or to a higher understanding of oneself. So the alliance of friendship with the Starchild is a more hierarchical and gender restrictive society, because it has created this idea of subordinates within its canon. Whereas the Sunmaster is always about aspiring to this greater form and about everyone pursuing that highest form. But it's also unflinching, irrespective of versions. The Sunmaster's journey is filled with a lot of very difficult stories. And just like the Bible in our world, which is not to say this is a one-to-one transfer at all. You have the text, and you have people's reading of the text, and the cultural context that emerges from the text often is built on lines outside of context. And that's extremely common to our world. It's normal. It's how human beings do. One example I'm going to read from before we talk a little bit more about the other influences of the Sunmaster's journey, because it is central to this work. It is profoundly integrated into whole characters like Desma that I talked about in the last episode, depending on my upload order. The Desma unit is an AI that has been built to adjudicate, to govern the planet Doro before its current Doran Council, and it has been uploaded with as refined a version of the Sunmaster's journey as possible as the foundation for its rulings. That does not work out well. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but that main concept of people have a book or a text, and then they have the culture around the text. So there's one line that keeps coming up. It comes up in the first half of the book before you see its source material. I do that a lot. I blend in a lot of these stories and these references in some ways that I hope will be pleasing to readers when they come across them. One line is used out of context, and the context it creates is quite a nice one. The line is, "We are all the same example." And that line is used by people all the time to talk about their connection to one another, to the fact that they belong to one another, the fact that civilization is more than individuals. It's beautiful. That's the liberal version of this text. But I also, at the beginning of the second half of the book, have the full segment. It's a poetic part of the Sunmaster's journey. And it's much bleaker. The context is a little bit more about hypocrisy. So it goes like this. "We are all the same example," said the phage to the prokaryote while stealing in to carry on. "We are all the same example," said one prokaryote to another while absorbing its kin cell whole. "We are all the same example," said the zooplankton to the phyto, as the arthropod said the same to it, as the mollusk said the same to it, as the fish said the same to it, as the bird said the same to it, as the amphibian said the same to it, as the reptile said the same to it, as the mammal said the same to it, as the insect said the same to it, and the infection it passed on agreed. "We are all the same example," said the reptile's progeny, "in 1,000 tongues over 1,000 generations, a cacophony of arbitrary blows, while their sun burnt itself nearly out. We are all the same example," said the hungry raiders to the last hope of reversing Soul's expansive gasp, after which there were no more same examples, not a single solitary one. So that piece is about a sort of injustice all throughout our evolutionary timescale as our species have grown in complexity, making the same mantra at times, not actually, phage is not actually talking to a prokaryote in this way, but the idea of using this hypocritical statement, we're all the same, while attacking, while consuming, while taking over, while destroying. And so the original text is about the hypocrisy of we are all the same example. But just like so many facets of any cultural canon, we cherry pick. And so some of the people in this text cherry pick. We are all the same example, like it's a positive, like obviously everyone's great. When in its core text you can see it has a much more insidious tone. And so those tensions are present in my work. World building on this level is tricky, but it's important. And the Sunmaster's journey is something I think I'm going to try to build a wiki around, because going through the text again, I have so many different stories, and I'm not going to talk about all of them. I have locations, I have core concepts, but I am going to talk about the fact that they pull from many different sources. So there is, and they relate to the world in some different ways. The Call of Destiny is a song that's used kind of as a partnership anthem, and it comes from the work, and there is a twinned sort of reading of that song in terms of its meaning. It has at its core, Saul make me Saul, Saul make me Saul, is this line calling to be like sun, and people have read it sometimes as a desire to destroy oneself, to obliterate oneself, just like one of my characters thinks that people are striving for things that are impossible, and so there is an act of self-destruction in that ache, and others see it much more optimistically. No, they're trying to become their highest form. Everything's fine. So those tensions are really important when you're building your own canon, your own culture. You need to create multiplicity of meaning because your characters are going to have multiplicity of meaning, because every civilization is going to have a variety of different peoples, populations, contexts in tension, in conversation. That's key. There are Easter eggs in my references in Sunmaster's Journey too, to many different sources. The story that causes the ruination of Desma and ruins her time as a governor of planet Doro is something drawn from a biblical story. It's drawn from King Solomon. So my version of the story, The Just Blade, does not translate well onto real world scenarios, but Desma sure tries. There are other elements though from philosophy. You're going to find Lacan is definitely going to come up in a couple of these stories. Aesop, my versions have obviously got to have some Aesop in there. I have one story that goes beyond the trolley problem to talk about the injustice of the trolley problem. I even have a little tiny coded reference to Tom Godwin, Cold Equations in the Piece. Pandora, that story is referenced loosely for many different cultural traditions. And I'm also going to say a little tiny Easter egg for you here is that there's one species in the text that you are welcome to read as Camus, because I spelled it with 2 M's. Cammus. Fine. Say Camus if you want. In my head, my secret Easter egg to myself is it is Camus. Because obviously Albert Camus has to come up in this text. There's a lot of absurdity that's built into Jovel's subject position. So we have pieces of poetry that are referenced and turned into something new. I have variations on a wide range of themes and the context. The idea of a prison, there's a very famous distant prison inside my world, which comes up a lot in this text, and a lot of other references. Oh yes, right. One other tiny reference to Robert Sheckley. So not a normal philosopher by any means. He's a sci-fi writer who was quite good at talking about estranging humanity from itself by reminding humanity that different species or different contexts would have different moralities. So there's also a little nod to Sheckley in the text. There's a lot. But I mention this because a lot of science fiction will create a new species or new context, and they'll flatten it. And as a writer, I feel you should be pushing for more verisimilitude in the way that our world is absolutely not flat. There's no one way to be Christian. There's no one way to be secular. There's no one way to be of a particular geography. And if you're writing another world, you have to include the variation in all of those other contexts and species. So Doro, for instance, has 4 different major settlements, and they have different complex relationships within themselves and between themselves that cause a lot of ruin based on not just geographical positioning, but resource allocation, diversity of population between different member species. And then again, as I mentioned, the retets, there's a wide range from extreme Orthodox to much more secular versions of their faith. And you have complex tensions even among the other species. Again, you might call it the Camus, and I'm going to call it Camus in my head. They also have an interesting, complex story of divergence, individuals from their broods, one brood from another, that also comes up in the text. And just like that, the canon for this world, the partnership story, it fragments. You've got the partnership story in the Sunmaster's Journey fragments into a whole other compact, the Alliance of Friendship, Starchild's Voyage, and huge differences in reading and interpretation there, as well as within individual stories. Something as innocuous as the Call of Destiny's line, "Saul, make me Saul," can be read 2 very different ways. The idea of we are all the same example can be cherry-picked to mean one thing, where in context it means something else. This is what deep world building should look like. But I'm going to, I think, see about putting together a wiki. I haven't done that before. I'm not, again, I want to be very clear, I'm not at all the first person who has done something with this depth. I'm just saying that a text is richer for recognizing that no one demographic is a hive mind or monolith, and your world building will be stronger for incorporating the variability of text and its interpretations within your cultures. So hopefully that led you to some thought-provoking ideas relating to your own work if you're fellow writers. And for readers, maybe that made you think of something you've enjoyed in other texts as well. Now that I'm thinking about it, Dune does a really good job of that in terms of analyzing texts in real time, because you always have the chapters starting with an analysis of an event through a kind of observation that has been elevated itself to its own ur-text for the civilization to come. So there are lots of conversations. Definitely. Ray Naylor's Mountain in the Sea from last year, it's not a second world sci-fi, it's near future, it's here, and it also has a text that Naylor has created to cite from in its analysis of the events that are ongoing on the world today. So that kind of interplay between text and event can be quite enriching. So hopefully you will make use of that tool when you are building your own worlds, and you will lean into similar when you read in science fiction or any other constructed civilization. Okay, that's pretty much it for me for now. Trying to keep these ones nice and short. And next time, let's dive into some Star Trek. Cheers.